This is ODAT Chat, your instant connection to recovery and community, one day at a time. This podcast may contain strong language, sexual content, and spiritual truth. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to ODAT Chat. My name is Arlena, and I'll be your host. In case you didn't know, ODAT stands for One Day at a Time. If you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, and if you enjoy what you hear, I hope you share it. So the purpose of the podcast is that we wanted to clear up a lot of misconceptions about addiction and recovery, and I also wanted to share some teachers, ideas, and exercises that have helped me on my own journey over the last 22 years that really fall outside the parameters of a 12-step group. And today, I'm going to be sharing a visualization exercise instead of a book recommendation. It's something that I've done many times. It's actually kind of a fun group project to do. I've done it several times with groups of girls, and it's called a vision board. So Oprah made it really popular years ago. It came back again on The Secret. This guy, John Assaraf, talked about a really interesting experience that he had where he did one, and he had this idea of a house that he wanted, and he put it on the vision board and put it away. And then years later, when he was moving actually into a new house, he pulled it out, and it was only then that he realized that he had actually moved into the very house that he put on his vision board. Not one like it, but exactly that house. So it just kind of speaks to, what can happen with these visualization exercises. I've actually done it many times myself, and I've had some really trippy experiences of really manifesting exactly what was on the vision board. So I've become very careful about what I put on those things. They say, be careful what you wish for. But it's a lot of fun, and there's actually a bunch of examples on Pinterest. I'll leave a link on the website, but you can just go to Pinterest and look up vision boards, and you'll get lots of examples of that. I like to keep it in my line of sight. I've actually taken a picture of it and used it as a background on my cell phone, just so that I'm constantly reminded of the things that I'm, trying to manifest in my life, whether it's an actual object, a thing, a place, a destination, experience, something like that. It can be used in a bunch of different ways, but it's a lot of fun, and I hope you try it. If you do, send me pictures of your vision board. I would love to see those. In this episode, I'll be talking with my dear friend Michele. We have a wide wandering conversation that covers a lot of topics, including her family of origin and how that shaped her self-image, dealing with a spouse who suffered a head injury in early sobriety, and as well as coping as a parent of a child who is on the autism spectrum. So Michele has long-term sobriety. She's really a kick in the pants and a lot of fun. I adore her. She has dedicated her life to helping others as a coach. And so I'll leave some information about how you can reach her on the website. But I really hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And with that, please enjoy this conversation with Michele. Well, Michele, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Sure. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, well, I thought you'd be a great guest. I've known you for a really long time. How long have you been sober now?
15 years.
Oh, my goodness. That is a long time.
I know. I had to think about that, but it's been that long.
Yeah, it's a long time. And I thought you'd be a great guest because you have some unique experiences that people don't often have an opportunity to hear about and relate to. Your husband had a pretty severe accident when he suffered a brain injury, and you've also had some issues around medications. And anyway, I thought you would be a great person to talk to because you have such a broad experience and you've been sober so long. So
great.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, so I'll just start with some warm-up questions just to give our listeners an idea of what you look like and kind of what you're about. So how old are you?
I'm 48.
We're the same age.
Yeah.
Okay, 48. And what do you do professionally?
I'm a coach. So I coach predominantly women.
Okay.
So I'm a personal development coach.
Awesome. Yeah. That's so great. I love that.
It's really amazing. I love what I do.
Coaches and therapists and mentors are very special. They hold a special place in my heart because you're dedicating your life to trying to help others heal and get better and have lives that flourish. So,
Absolutely.
You know, it's like any kind of healing profession I just hold in the highest regard. So
Yeah. I love what I do. I'm very blessed.
We'll actually have show notes, and we'll include your information on there so people can reach out to you after.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. I'm sure people are going to connect. You know, you share from the heart.
Yeah.
And anytime we share from the heart, I really feel like that's the language of love, and people really connect with that. So,
I agree. I totally agree. Yeah.
I know people are going to want to get a hold of you after this. So we'll make that available in the show notes. Let's see. So you've been sober and in recovery for 15 years. Do you want to just give me, I'm changing the format a little bit.
Oh, that's fine.
I thought we would do maybe 10 minutes of sort of like your experience, strength, and hope.
Sure.
So people can kind of get a frame of reference for what brought you into recovery.
Yeah. So I started drinking when I was 13, and I hate saying I was raised in an alcoholic home, but it's my truth. And so, but it was a functional alcoholism. And so it was actually pretty confusing in that my dad had a full-time job, and he was my soccer coach, and he and my mom, chaperoned our ski team. And so he was very active, and it wasn't like this drunk that was, on the couch and non-productive, but he raged a lot, and I grew up in a lot of criticism. And so I think the message that I picked up was that I'm not enough.
Right.
And so also when I was 7, I remember just not feeling enough because I didn't know this at the time, but I have dyslexia. So I had I had a really hard time learning how to read. And so at the age of 7, I was in this Catholic school, and I remember feeling like they were going to kick me out because I couldn't read. And they assigned this little sister, Grace, and she didn't do any remediation to help me read better, but she saved my little heart, And so what that comes down to in terms of alcoholism is, when I picked up alcohol at 13, I finally found a medicine for my anxiety.
Right.
I suffered from, crazy levels of anxiety. As a child, when you're in school 180 days a year. And so, if you're anxious every single day because the teachers are going to ask you to do something that you can't do, which was reading, it created massive amounts of anxiety and uncertainty for me. So I picked it up at 13, and I can say it was one because it was modeled well, in my family, and my dad and my mom made it look really fun, and they were very social and outgoing people. And so alcohol looked like just fun. It looked like something that I wanted to do, but also what I realized when I took it into my body, it was solving this anxiety problem that I had. And so I kind of ran with that. In high school, I was, I can say I'd crossed that line into alcoholism by the time I was 16. Again, I didn't know that at 16, but when I got into recovery when I was 32 and I started doing the steps and doing reflection on my life, I realized, oh my gosh, absolutely was driving in blackouts, was, getting violently ill from drinking. And so, had that didn't have the obsession of the mind, but I definitely had the allergy of the body and just didn't know it. I just didn't have enough information about alcoholism. So in high school, I had this double life. So I was the athlete during the week, and then I was the partier on the weekend. And then by my senior year, it was, alcohol and partying became the priority, and I stopped doing athletics altogether. Put myself through college, worked full time, went to night school. And so I would say because some of the things that kept me functioning as an alcoholic was that I was just too busy trying to be enough. I just wanted to feel good, and feeling good was based on what other people thought about me. And so I wanted to achieve and to have success in the world. And so, when I was 32, I got into recovery, but the last 3 years of my drinking, I spent doing what they call control drinking, which is not drinking as much as you actually want to, but trying to curtail how much you actually drink. And I was doing that because I was dating he wasn't my husband at the time. He was my boyfriend at the time. But we'd been dating for about a year, and he was saying, you know, this relationship isn't working for me. And I was thinking, okay, here comes the big breakup. And he said, let's go into counseling. And I was like, wow, I'd never met a man that wanted to go into counseling. And so I said, let's do it.
Voluntarily?
Yeah, voluntarily, right? So we go to this counselor, and it was a really unique situation. It was a married couple that were both marriage therapists. And so there was 4 of us in the room. And I remember them saying, you know, what are your goals for being here? And so, you know, Craig was like, I really love this woman, but I think that she might be an alcoholic, and she's fiscally irresponsible, pulling out the big words, right? Fiscally irresponsible. So,
with money.
Right. So 2 things came out of that. Number 1, I went home and I made an Excel spreadsheet. I was 27 years old. I got my first credit card when I was 24 because I went to France and I studied in France for a year. And in a 3-year period, I racked up $27,000 in debt, and I didn't even know it. Yeah. So denial in terms of our alcoholism permeates every part of our life. Yeah. So it was my denial about my drinking was leading into my denial about my financial life and responsibility and or lack of responsibility that I was taking. And then it was like I could admit that I had alcoholic tendencies, of course, now knowing I was already an alcoholic, but I just didn't want to let it go. I needed alcohol. And so I spent the last 3 years of my drinking in that controlled drinking. We would go to a restaurant, and we were both in sales, and we would go out to dinner a lot. And we would sit down, and I would defer to him when the waitress would come and say, what would you like to drink? And, you know, I would just be praying, please order some kind of alcoholic beverage. And he would say, I want a Diet Coke. And I'd be thinking, oh shit, let me order one too, so I don't have to be the only one drinking. And then he would go on business trips, and you know, I would be like game on and totally drinking as much as I really wanted to. And so what that comes to mind for me is, you know, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about how we have this allergy of the body and obsession of the mind. And I couldn't really relate to the obsession of the mind until I stopped drinking as much as I wanted to. Mm-hmm. And so that last 3 years of drinking was complete and utter hell, because as an alcoholic, not knowing that I was one, I wanted to drink more than I would actually allow myself to drink. So what I was doing is I was like thinking about it all the time. So long story short, what happened for me and what got me sober is being a mom. We ended up getting married, and we got pregnant right away. And let's see, I was in sales. I was in the top 2% of our company. My mom quit her job. I thought I was going to be this, you know, high-powered sales executive with a baby, toting the baby. And when this baby was born, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like so quitting my job. And I took a year. I fell in love. But what I didn't realize is that I was going to go through this massive identity crisis as a woman that was solely identifying myself through my career, and my worth was what I made. Right. Now I'm the stay-home mom. And so what am I going to do with that? And so it led to a pretty amazing identity crisis. And so a year after John was born, and still doing the controlled drinking, I ended up with this horrible last drunk, and that I wasn't planning to drink that day. I can just net it out to say I wasn't planning to drink that day. And then I kept drinking and drinking. I started with beer, and then it went to wine, and then it went to 151. And I first couldn't get drunk, and then I was stinking drunk, and the room was spinning, and I passed out. And so what got me to the rooms of recovery was that my husband came to me at 5 o'clock in the morning the next day and held out his hands with our baby and said, I can't do this anymore. And I thought he meant I can't be married anymore. And what he meant is just, no, I just can't take care of this baby for one more second. So I said, well, what do you mean you can't do this anymore? And he said, Michele, you were completely passed out. And John was crying all night. And it just hit me like a Mack truck, like, oh my gosh, you know, I can't do this. You know, I had come to the point where my drinking was absolutely affecting me being a mother. And so I had somebody in our family had been sober for 9 years, and I knew where to go, and I knew what they were going to ask me to do. They were going to ask me to do this spiritual program, and they were going to ask me to work these steps and traditions, and I just didn't balk. I didn't go, no, I won't do that. I just was so willing to do something different. And I'm glad. I went to the meeting. I announced myself as an alcoholic, and all these women approached me with numbers and and welcome and asked me to go to women's meetings. And then suggestions just kept getting made, like get a sponsor and work the steps and get into service. And I just kept following direction. And I'm glad I did, because when we got pregnant with our daughter right away. And I don't recommend pregnancy and hormones. They do not go together. I mean, I don't recommend recovery with early recovery and pregnancy are very tricky. And
no major changes in the first year.
No major changes, but I didn't listen to that. So I got through the steps. I was all the way through. I was to step 9. So the promises were starting to come true for me. And what happened is I was 9 months sober, 7 months pregnant, and my husband had bought a motorcycle. He had been riding most of his life, but had taken like a 20-year break. And this was off-roading motorcycle riding. And he was in a horrible motorcycle accident. And he suffered a brain injury and didn't work for 5 years.
5 years?
5 years. Yeah, he didn't work for 5 years. And it was a frontal lobe injury. So it affected, all his executive functioning. So his short-term memory and his impulse control and social inhibitions and anger. So I married this guy that was this amazingly easygoing and fun-loving and kind. I think I saw him get mad like 3 times before we were married, and we were together for 3 years. And I did everything in my power to not marry my dad. But after this, my dad was very volatile and very raged a lot. It was a very angry dude, and a lot of fun, but there was a lot of rage in there too. And so I did everything in my power to marry somebody the opposite of my dad. And what happened was after the head injury, here it was. I was like married. It was like I was married to my dad. So he looked the same on the outside, but it was like being married to a completely different person. And I was like calling my sponsor every day. I did not sign up for this. I don't know how I'm going to stay sober. This is too hard. And then our son wasn't developing typically. And so the pediatrician a couple months later was like, we have to get John's speech assessed. He was like 2 years at the time. And I was just like, I just can't do this. I have to have this baby first. So we got, Alyssa was born, and she was born with a heart defect. And they thought
oh my God, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. They were like wheeling in this huge echocardiogram, and the cardiologists were preparing us for her, what she would look like when she went into heart failure in 2 weeks. And we were like, what are you talking about? I had people in recovery completely in my hospital room. It was like, because of people in recovery, I was totally held emotionally and spiritually. But it just seemed like one thing after another. So I'm taking Alyssa to cardiologist, I'm taking Craig to neurologist, and then I'm taking John to a speech therapist, and he was diagnosed with a speech disorder that later led to a diagnosis of autism. Okay. And so in my first year of recovery, it was, head injury, heart defects, and autism, and one thirsty alcoholic that's just trying not to drink one day at a time. And so I just held on, and I went to meetings every day, and I just treated it as a one day at a time. Like literally, it was one day at a time, sometimes 1 minute at a time, one breath at a time, and living in the serenity prayer, trying to accept the things I could not change, and asking God for the serenity to accept what I couldn't change. And there was a lot that I couldn't change. Yeah. And, I'm super grateful that I stayed sober, because my life today is so different. Like, my son is 16 and he's doing great. And is he in the autism spectrum? Maybe a little, but doing fabulous. We did a massive intervention on him because I was a sober mom. Mm-hmm. We could get the help that he needed. And he worked his ass off to acquire the skills that he didn't naturally develop. And Alyssa never needed that heart surgery. She still has a cardiologist, but she's cleared for all activity. Craig in 2008 started another business, even though the neurologist said after 2 years, this is as good as it's going to get. Mm-hmm. We don't know what our brains can do. Right. We don't know. Our bodies are so resilient and so amazing, and it wants to heal itself. And so I think so much of it is intention and what we do with our mind. Mm-hmm. And we can really limit ourselves with our thoughts and our beliefs.
Absolutely.
And so we did this music therapy when it was like late 2007, and Alyssa was 4 and John was 7. And it was because Alyssa has auditory processing disorder and also dyslexia, and John has autism. And we were saying to the speech therapist that was guiding us through this therapy, it's called Tomatis. It's amazing. Could Craig do it too? And she said, absolutely. There's no proof that it will heal a head injury, but it won't hurt him. Well, now there's neuroscience. There's proof that it absolutely, this type of music therapy, can do some amazing changes in the brain. And for sure, in terms of auditory processing, it rewires your
neural pathways.
Exactly. It's auditory re-education. So it just like woke up something inside of Craig's brain.
What?
Don't even need to know what happened. All I know is that after he did this therapy, he said, honey, I feel different and I think I want to start a company. And I said, go for it. He had been on permanent disability through Social Security right after the injury. So he'd been on disability for 5 years, and that devastated his self-esteem.
He was a businessman before.
Yeah, so he owned his own company, right, and was very successful businessman. And so to go from making millions of dollars to making very little on Social Security, it just annihilated his self-esteem. And so, of course, I was supportive when he said he wanted to go back. And so he's killing it right now. He went back to work, created a new company in 2008, and he's doing so well. And so I guess my whole point in my story is like, in Alcoholics Anonymous, they talk about don't quit 5 minutes before the miracle. And my story was like, don't quit 5 years before the miracle. Because there was like a lot of really hard things that happened, and change doesn't happen overnight. And so while John was recovering from autism and Craig's recovering from his head injury and Alyssa was going through what she went through and I was getting sober, it was just being patient and believing in that steady progress of change, that slow is real, and that we do get better and don't give up, and now we're celebrating in the victories of what we've overcome as a family.
Slow is real. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. So I couldn't be happier that I'm sober. And I talk about this a lot, that, I've started 2 nonprofits in recovery. Yeah. I've launched a coaching practice. Before I got sober, I was a sales executive. I traveled all over Europe when I was in my 20s, studied abroad. And I can say, yeah, I've done these things, but my most cherished accomplishment is my sobriety.
Right.
Yeah.
I totally
Being a sober mom is like my most, I just got the chills as I said that, is that my children have never seen me drunk.
Yeah.
And I hold on to that during the hard days. Yeah. And there are days that come and you just go, a drink would be so great right now. And it's like, no, I cannot trade this in. My sobriety is too precious.
Right. You mentioned being in sales, and drinking is very prevalent in sales.
Yeah.
I'm also in sales, and it's like everywhere you go, everyone's getting loaded. And it's tough to be exposed to that all the time if you're not solid. It sounds like you were just very clear right from the beginning.
Super clear.
That was...
in Alcoholics Anonymous, we talk about, if you read through the big book, it talks about conceding to your innermost self that you're alcoholic. Mm-hmm. And once you do that, like I did that really early on, I've conceded to my innermost self that I'm alcoholic. And what that means for me is that I cannot safely drink again.
Right.
Like I can drink again. That's true. But safely drink again.
Right.
Because the truth is once I take one sip, I actually do not know what will happen.
Right.
I cannot predict the outcome.
Right.
And if I cannot predict the outcome, I have no business having any alcohol in my body.
Right. It's so scary.
Yeah, it's really...
It's the whole Jekyll and Hyde.
It is. It is.
The unpredictability.
It is the unpredictability. And just the miracles that I've got to witness as a result of being sober, I just think I would have missed so much.
So much.
And like the contrast, I remember when Alyssa was born and she started going through her developmental milestones and she started, achieving things that John didn't achieve. He was my first child. I didn't know. I didn't know babies are supposed to feed you Cheerios and then they point at airplanes before they can talk to get your attention. It's called social reciprocity.
Okay.
I didn't know that, right? Most parents don't know that unless you have a kid with autism and you start learning all these things because they have to acquire skills that they don't naturally develop. So I think if I was a drunk mom, mom, I would have been in the pour me a drink. But because I was a sober mom, I got to authentically be sad. Like, hey, John missed that. Oh my gosh, my heart hurts. But then let's celebrate Alyssa's milestones.
Oh, interesting. So
Right?
while she was going through her milestones, you were simultaneously healing the past and
I was
celebrating
grieving
the
and healing at the same time because I didn't know what I missed until I saw what I missed.
healing. Grieving is healing.
Absolutely.
Do you think? Yeah.
For sure.
I always see that, like, I was actually at a meeting this morning where this guy, who I've seen in the rooms for years, decades, and he just recently has reached this point where he cries all the time, and I was like, good, cry.
You need to get it out.
That's a sign that we're getting in touch with the deep feelings that we have repressed for so long.
I agree.
So when, it's so interesting that society tells us to cope with our feelings by like holding your mud, or people say, oh, don't cry. Like they think they're doing somebody a kindness, but my goal is to get someone to cry, because that's when the healing happens.
Yeah, it's that authenticity. It's like, I remember when I was getting sober, and for so many years I was out of touch. When I got sober, I was 32. I started drinking when I was 13. So I had, like, to exactly what your point is, I had detached from my emotions and really knowing what I was feeling and knowing what was appropriate and not appropriate. Right. And so I remember calling my sponsor all the time going, this is happening and this is what I'm experiencing. And she would label that. She would go, oh yeah, that's sadness. And I'd go, oh, okay. And then she's like, that's exactly what's appropriate, Michele. And I'd be like, oh, all right. And then I'd call her back and go, well, this, and that thing is happening. And this is coming up in my body. And she's like, oh yeah, that's rage, gosh, and I'd be like, oh, okay. So it was this whole re-education to experience this myriad of expression and emotions that we have as a human being, because I was either like sad or like elated. Right. And there was very little in between. Yeah. And that's just not real. We're human beings and we have all of these emotions, and it's part of life. It's part of our experience here.
I had that same experience in the beginning where it was like I'd be having these feelings and I'd be like, I do not know what's going on. And it often reminds me of like those old time switchboard operators.
Yes. I love that visual.
Yeah. So you've seen the black and white. Yeah. The sepia pictures that are all like sort of brown and gradations of brown, but they're like sitting they have the headphones, and there's the switchboard, and there's all these plugs everywhere, and it's like someone took out all my plugs.
Oh my gosh, that is such a beautiful visual.
Yeah, and recovery for me has been about identifying which plug goes where. Yep. Right. And Agreed. I had some of those same experiences where I'd call my sponsor and I'd be like, this is what's going on. And she'd be like, oh, that's an inappropriate response to the situation. That means that you're reacting to something that happened a long time ago. And I'd be like, what? What are you talking about? Like, I had no idea about the concept of repression of feelings and emotions and having them volcanically explode later. Right? You repress, and then explode. Yeah. And I drink, and so I had like two alter egos. It was either Badass Betsy or Wimpy Wendy. I love it. I never know who was going to come out. Yeah. And sometimes I was fighting, and sometimes I was crying, and sometimes I was both those bitches in one day.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Yeah, just total insanity. Yeah. And because when I was sober, I would stuff my feelings. And then when I would drink, they'd all come out.
I completely relate to that.
I'd wake up the next morning and be like, what was that all about? Like totally baffled.
Yeah.
What was that all about?
Yeah, because we had spirits in us, right? Alcohol. Yeah. I think about alcohol as spirits. Yeah. So we had something in us that wasn't us. Yeah. That makes us come out sideways. Yeah. That makes us say things and do things and have experiences that is not truly who we are.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. Oh my goodness. It's just fascinating to, once you get sober and start to sort of deconstruct all this stuff and sort it all out. Yeah. And that's why I thought the steps were like so fucking brilliant, because it was the first time I was ever given a set of tools to help me sort it all out. Absolutely. What's mine? What's not mine? Right. I found that I was taking inappropriate responsibility for other people. Absolutely. And not enough responsibility for myself. drugs and alcohol were my coping skill. Like I couldn't stand feeling all my feelings. I felt like if I had to feel everything that I was feeling, I don't know if I would have made it. Like they kind of saved my life for a little while.
For sure.
Until they
served a purpose.
Yeah, it served a purpose.
Yeah.
But then when it doesn't work, it's like, well, then what do you do?
We get sober and we get real.
Sober. And I'm just so amazed that you were able to stay sober through all that stuff like that.
I'm amazed too.
What do you think? Because you and I have both seen people who don't make it. What do you think was the difference for you? Like, why did you stay?
I really think that a big piece of it was being connected to women in the program and
support group.
Oh, support, because everybody that I was connected with, besides family of origin, were people that were sober, and I was going to meetings every day. Mm-hmm. So I was 7 days a week, even in the midst of just utter chaos. And so I think what happens sometimes for people when the shit hits the fan, they're like, oh, I don't have time for my recovery. And that's when you have to make more time for your recovery. Yeah. And I don't think it's one thing. Right. I don't think one thing kept me sober. I think it's a miracle. Like it's grace, number one, for sure. It's grace. Crap ton of willingness. I mean, that's the truth. I wanted to stay sober more than I wanted to drink.
You have a lot of ambition. So you wanted better for yourself.
I wanted better for myself. And it wasn't that I didn't have days that I wanted to drink, because there were days I was so thirsty. I wanted to drink. Mm-hmm. It's just that I kept doing the deal in that I was told to be honest and open-minded and willing. Like that's how we stay sober. Honest, open, willing. Yeah. And I just kept doing those simple things and then reaching out to a sponsor that would give me the most amazing advice, like keeping it down to simple thoughts like hungry, angry, lonely, tired. She would keep it so simple for me. I would call her, blah, 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 my kid has autism, da, 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 da. And she would say, when's the last time you had something to eat, honey? And I'm like, what the hell does that have to do with Christ Tea in China? Right? And then, but she's right, because you don't want an alcoholic getting too hungry. Right. We don't want our blood, think about it, like from a logistical standpoint. We don't want our blood sugar to get too crazy. Yeah. It makes sense, right? Where we crave sugars like alcohol. Yeah. So hungry, angry, lonely, tired has a purpose. So then the angry for me was more about being anxious. Right? Oh, so when people talk about hungry, angry, lonely, tired, I replace anger with anxious. Yeah. So for me, I'm more anxious. I'm more anxious than I am angry. Okay. And so I have to really watch my anxiety, because when I get too anxious, I get real thirsty, and alcohol becomes an option. So I have to watch that. Okay. And then the loneliness is like, am I isolating? Am I pulling away from my herd, my AA community, or am I leaning into them? And then the tired is self-explanatory. And when you're a parent of a 2-year-old with autism and you have a newborn, hell yes, you're tired. So I don't know that was necessarily going away, but that's where naps come in. And I didn't learn how to nap until I got sober, because people that are ambitious don't nap, right? Yeah. That's the story I would tell myself. So, I mean, it was a lot of little things, and it was certainly a one day at a time motto. It was just like, I'm not drinking today. And then it would be like, hurry up and get to 9 p.m. so I can get in bed and start over. And maybe tomorrow I'll feel different. Yeah. And I would say most of the times that I wanted to drink, if I could just get through my day and lay my head on the pillow with dignity, right? So I'm not feeling any shame. I didn't create more chaos because I drank. I put my head on the pillow, and when I woke up that next day, that urge to drink was gone. So I kept building evidence. Okay. The evidence kept spiraling on itself, where it was just like I would collect different stories, like this worked and that worked, and reaching out worked, and telling the truth, like I want to drink. Yeah. I told the truth at meeting level a ton, probably more than most people wanted to hear. Yeah. And I was going to any length to not drink.
Yeah, my opinion is I will say anything at podium. Well, not anything at podium level, but I will certainly be honest about that part.
Yeah, the not drinking. And people, and you know what I think happens when you are willing to say what's really going on and affecting your sobriety at group level in front of a bunch of recovering people. What happens is that you're left with what you can handle, and the group takes away pieces of your pain so that you can bear the rest. That's just, and I didn't make that up. I heard that at a meeting, and that's been my experience.
Yeah, I've heard that joy shared is expanded and pain shared is diminished.
That has been my experience.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. So sharing is the key and is connection. And I just recently saw this TED Talk where this guy was talking about everything that we think we know about alcoholism is wrong or drug addiction. And really it's about craving connection. And it's like we don't have, a lot of us didn't grow, it sounds like you didn't grow up with a lot of coping skills for your feelings, right? And it sounds like I want to dig into a little bit about your family of origin, but it sounds like you were handed a lot of additional problems, right?
Yeah.
Where your not good enough feelings come from.
Yeah.
But what that does is it creates separation.
Yeah.
Right. And as we separate, we isolate. As we isolate, it's like our negative thinking takes over and it creates like this terrible loneliness. And I don't know a group of people who is more plagued by loneliness than alcoholics and drug addicts.
Yeah,
and
I agree with that.
What do we do as a society to alcoholics and drug addicts? We punish them and we isolate them. That is the exact opposite of what's needed. So we go to these meetings and we start connecting and we start relating and we start healing.
I agree.
And we start helping each other. I love the whole concept of speaking at podium level. We're required to speak the solution. It's important to acknowledge the problem, but we are required to speak the solution. And that's not lost on me because I'm sure you've had this experience too where you're speaking at podium level and you feel the energy coming through you.
Oh, for sure.
Right? And then you sit down and you're like, whoa. Or like you're speaking one-on-one with someone, a sponsee or a sponsor, and you feel that energy flow between you. So that's connection, right? And I feel like that's what heals us.
I agree.
We relate. And I used to tell my business to anybody who would stand still long enough, but it wasn't until I got sober and got a sponsor. I could see in her eyes that she understood and like she really got it.
Yeah.
And I stopped doing that afterwards.
Exactly.
Yeah. It was amazing.
I would agree with that connection piece. I think it's very important.
Yeah, we have to connect. We have to connect our feelings and identify them. But then, I see people connect through pain and then stay there. And that was
and my story is there is some pain in there, and I think a lot of us have pain. It's how do you move through pain with recovery to create that resilience.
Yes.
So the resilience is once you move through the pain and it hasn't destroyed you.
Right.
It's created and shaped and molded you for sure. I wouldn't go back, and have John not be autistic. I wouldn't go back and have Craig not have the head injury. It's like those experiences, they were hard. But there's been so many blessings on the other side that pain does shape us and molds us, and it creates, the only word I can think of is resilience. Yeah,
and it does create character. And that sounds...
Character is another word. That's true, yeah.
I hate that whole, it's character building. It sounds so, I don't know, it just not
Well, you don't want to hear that when you're going through it. But on the other side, it makes sense.
It does. And it's interesting because I've had lessons that I would not have signed up for, but I'm so grateful that I had them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds to me from like what you're saying that those experiences with your husband and with your kids has led you to this place. So you're not only uniquely qualified to relate to other women who are struggling with recovery, but you can relate to people who are dealing with a spouse that has been sick.
For sure.
Sick or whatever.
It changes your life when your spouse becomes sick or different, for sure. Or your kids.
Oh, I can't imagine the powerlessness you must have felt during that time.
It was really hard.
Yeah. I'm very inspired.
Oh, good. I'm so happy. That makes me happy.
Yeah. You've done such good things, the nonprofits, and you're just such a go-getter.
Thank you.
I relate to that too, because I'm kind of like that.
Yeah. It's so fun.
Go after things. I feel like we covered pretty much all the things that we were going to talk about Craig and his head injury. You had told me some funny stories about his recovery process.
Oh my
Do you want to share some of the stories about because the frontal lobe is the executive function, so that tells you it's socially appropriate. And you told me a story about a knife in the...
Oh, okay. So there's the knife story, but this is one of my favorites. So, and then we'll talk about the knife story too, because that one's good.
Okay.
So frontal lobe is executive functioning, right? So it's impulse control and social inhibition. Okay, fine. So he also had some seizures, so he couldn't drive for a while.
Okay.
So he came with me and our little baby at the time to my OB/GYN's office because I had to have a checkup because we just had this baby. And so he's the only man sitting in the lobby of this doctor's office. Mm-hmm. And all these women are there. And he is making conversation. Oh, yes, he is. Saying, well, so why are you here today? And I'm thinking, you have to be quiet and shut your pie hole right now. Like that, if you don't talk about most women, like why are they at an OB/GYN office? Really? That's your question? Okay. So that's story one. Story two was...
So you're like, do you have a venereal disease or are you pregnant?
I mean, really?
Is it the clap? Are you a whore?
What are you talking about? And I was thinking, so honestly, what I was thinking is this is paybacks from all those times before I got sober and I was such a freaking radically crazy drunk. I would be totally plowed and then like get up on tables and dance. And I remember this one convention we went to, he was like rep of the year or something and he was getting some big award and we're in Hawaii and they had just renamed the company and I get up on stage and this is like $1 billion company that Craig reps. Okay.
Oh my God.
Okay. And I get up on this stage with this freaking band and I'm like, I don't even want to say the name of the company.
No.
Okay, I'll say it. Just it's a company, you know, right? So I said like the new name, and I'm all drunk and everything. And then we were given these little sarongs to put on, and I had mine on my head, and I was pretending to be a nun. And so I'm thinking, okay, this head injury is a payback for all those drunken like embarrassments that I caused on him. So here we are. So now going back to Craig's little antics. So he was such a technology man before the head injury. Like, remember when people had pagers? So he had like a pager, a cell phone. I know, and it was badass if you had a pager. Okay, so a pager, like it's like at your hip like a gun, right? It's like a technology pager is your gun. So you've got your pager and you've got your cell phone and your laptop. Everywhere we went, this guy had his technology with him. Okay. So now, you know, after the head injury, he was just really fearful and was into weapons. Like he got into weapons. One day I went to our computer and up on the screen was how to become a private investigator. And I was like, what the F? So I'm like, why do you want to become a private investigator? He's like, so I can have concealed weapons. I'm like, this is so weird. So little did I know he had this big ass knife in his pocket. We're walking down the street with a baby, a newborn baby and a toddler in the stroller. We're walking down in Campbell, this cute little town in Silicon Valley, right? And these really loud Harley Davidson motorcycles go by, but it wasn't like the preppy, cute, like 40-year-old dude that is going through a midlife crisis and buying a Harley. Sorry if you're that dude. That's my judgment. Okay. No, but it was like, it looked like gang members. Like, I don't know,
like
but
dirty,
scared me to death. And Craig's like, hey, da-da-da-da-da, my baby's sleeping. And I'm like thinking, you cannot talk like that. Be quiet. So then we finally get to the restaurant. I go inside to get our to-go order. I come outside, he's flipping out this big ass knife and he starts cleaning his fingernails with a big knife. And I'm like, what the F are you doing? Right? And he's looking at me so innocently, like, I'm cleaning my nails. What's wrong with that? And it's just, so that's where the impulse control and the social inhibition comes from. When you have a frontal lobe injury, you really don't know that you're out there. You don't.
Yeah.
You think that, I mean, there were times
He's like,
where
this is
he would lose
normal.
track of time when he couldn't drive. It was some scary stuff that we went through. Mm-hmm. I got home one day and he had walked to the chiropractor, which is 2 to 3 miles from our house. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's one way and then back. So it'd been 4 hours and there was no show on my man. I'm like thinking, what happened? So I call the chiropractor and they're like, he left 2 hours ago. There's so scary stuff. Now, luckily he showed up on the scene and of course he got a talking to that night. But I mean, it was crazy. Those are some of my little antics, but my little stories, but.
And he's not like that now.
No,
he's like totally
the
normal.
only thing I think the residual effect of is, some short-term memory.
Okay.
And I don't think we're at the age where we can call it old age.
Really? Because I have like some...
Okay, we can.
Maybe.
But I would say that and being a little bit unorganized. Other than that, I mean, he's got it.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's probably something that only a wife would recognize, right?
Yeah.
I have a friend whose husband...
I don't think anybody else is noticing anything about him.
Nobody would notice.
No.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
It's within the realm of normal.
Yeah.
So, but only something a wife would know that would be different. I have a friend whose husband, they were in a car accident and a light pole fell on their car and basically like hit him in the head. It was fell on the driver's side.
Wow.
So he couldn't drive for a while too. And she told me and I was like, God, you are so lucky because he came out the other side pretty normal.
So lucky.
Yeah. She's like, it was only like little things, like all of a sudden, like, it was something mundane, like he hated peanut butter, now he loves it, or he didn't like Chinese food and now he does, or just like little things.
Wow.
It's like, okay, well, it's still within the realm of normal, but for her it was like, oh, it's just all these weird little, it was like
things. Yeah.
That kind of make
these were pretty big things.
well, the knife in public.
Yeah, the knife and the anger. I think that was the hardest thing for me and there's no really funny stories there. It's just
That's scary.
Yeah, it was just, so he would go from 0 to 10 and just be angry, and he would lose stuff all the time and then blame people. I felt so bad for him. But I think,
did he lose friends over that? Or?
I don't recall him actually losing friends. But I stuffed my truth in our marriage for a really long time. So
what?
Well, I think I think I came up with this contract with myself because he got really depressed at one point and it was pretty scary. And I created this contract with myself that was like, don't make him mad or sad. Like somehow I have power over that.
Okay.
And so I feel like, you know, there were some things that I normally would have spoken up and I didn't. And so it took, in 2013, I kind of had my own little mini, actually there was nothing mini about it. I had a pretty big breakdown.
So,
and, yeah.
This was interesting because I was just talking with somebody recently about how we sell ourselves out.
Yeah.
Typically, like while we're using, or like in childhood, then while we're using, and sometimes in recovery too. Yeah. So, but that carries a price tag. It's like peace at any price.
Absolutely. And you know, I have a good friend that I think you're going to be interviewing here, Beth, about leadership, and she talks about it being delayed leadership, you know, and this inability to take action for our own good. That's not her words; those are mine.
Yeah.
But that's what it is, and I know what triggers it for me. It's avoidance of conflict. You know, that's and the people pleasing. So I have to be really careful with the people pleasing and the avoidance of conflict. Is that I will sometimes not show up for myself and speak the truth that needs to be told and put myself second.
Yeah,
and
put somebody else's needs ahead of yours.
Ahead of mine. And our bodies don't like that. Like our bodies don't lie. And so we will feel dis-ease if we keep doing that. You know, it doesn't have to become a disease like cancer, but we will feel that dis-ease if we're not in our authenticity.
Yeah, you know, there's this idea that is such a lie that, time heals all wounds. I think that is such a lie. It doesn't. The pain waits, right? The
pain waits if you don't deal with it. I absolutely agree with that. Yeah,
you repress it, and then it comes out as disease.
That's what happened for me. I mean, I had a pretty big breakdown in 2013, and oh yeah, and like outside help breakdown, and
was that like depression or just like?
After talking to my therapist, it's like he talked about it being a lot of psychic repression.
Yeah,
like just seriously, like you know, truth getting stuck in you. So I don't know.
Remember back in the day, like you would hear of these actresses having breakdowns.
Yeah,
like that used to be a thing.
Yeah.
Right now, I feel like we call it, put some sort of clinical label on it.
I know.
It's just temporary.
I know. It's so true.
It seems like there's something
in our family history. There's depression and anxiety for sure in my in our family.
Yeah.
So,
do you feel like your anxiety, just kind of going back to your family of origin a little bit in your relationship with your dad, do you feel like some of your anxiety was created by like the verbal abuse and things that you received as a child?
I think absolutely is possible. I think it's twofold. I think it was the dyslexia and being in a learning environment where I was like terrified every day.
Yeah.
And then I think being in an environment where you're walking on eggshells and you're not sure how you're going to be received.
Yeah.
So it was either I was being received with love and just, love is a really good word to describe it. Or, stop being so theatrical and dramatic. What's wrong with you?
Minimizing your feelings.
I heard what's wrong with you a lot. And so, I've done a lot of Tony Robbins events, and when you do Date with Destiny, one of the things he talks about is this: everybody's got a primary question. And it's a question that you might not even acknowledge that you ask yourself. And as soon as he started talking about this topic, boom, in the back of my mind, what's wrong with me? My primary question flew up.
Oh, wow.
And it makes sense. So what you do is you replace that primary question. And now I have to think about what I replace mine with. How can I appreciate and enjoy even more God's unconditional love and acceptance? Wow. I would much rather tell that question to me. How can I appreciate and enjoy even more God's unconditional love and acceptance? Because don't we just want love and acceptance?
Absolute connection. Yeah.
Right.
Love and acceptance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Love and connection for sure.
Yeah.
The I'm enough. So my subconscious mind kept pushing up, what's wrong with you? Well, that's what I kept hearing. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? So what does our mind do? It actively looks for ways
It's looking to answer the question.
It's looking to answer the question. So then you're like, oh, I have dyslexia. Oh, I have ADHD. Oh, I have this. Oh, I have depression. Oh, I have anxiety. So you're looking for what's wrong with me.
Yeah.
Versus asking a new question, you get new answers.
Yeah. It sounds like you combated that quick because you're so ambitious and accomplished.
Yeah.
So you answered that, you identified the answer, but then you went into, I'm going to fix it.
Oh, I'm such a fixer.
Yeah.
I'm such a,
you know what? People pleasing.
Okay. So here's what's so funny too. My little mantra was watch me. You don't think I can? Watch me.
Yeah.
So
such a rebel.
I was such a rebel. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So I remember I was friends with a family that had 9 kids, and we
kids.
Yeah, the youngest was 3 years older than me, and so we did a lot of partying together. At one point, the family said, now she's 3 years older than me, and I was only 15 years old at the time. And they said, my nickname growing up was Shelly, and they said, we don't want you hanging out anymore with Shelly. She's never going to amount to be more than a secretary or a waitress. Well, first of all, what's wrong with a secretary and a waitress?
That was super condescending.
So condescending and so judgmental. Hello, coming from a woman that never even worked a day in her life. That's what's wrong with a secretary or waitress. But guess how I took it, because it's exactly the way it was delivered. It was delivered as judgment that I was never going to amount to be anything.
You took that as a challenge.
Oh, hell yes. And you know what a blessing. When I started doing the steps and I got to the 4th step, oh, hell yes, they were in my 4th step. And I was like, but I got to get on the other side and go, well, as a parent, how scary must that have been for them looking for a reason of why their daughter was so out of control. So I got to have some compassion for them saying what they said. And then I actually got to get into some gratitude. Thank God they said what they said, because you know what? That was the fire. I call it, can I cuss on your show?
Yes.
Okay, I call it fuck you fuel.
Oh, I love it.
Don't you love that? Okay, so it was my fuck you fuel for years that fed my fire. And it was like, oh, you don't know who I am, watch me.
Watch me.
You don't know who I am, watch me. Now, if I didn't have that fuel, I could have gotten real shut down by my own alcoholism, by the own criticism that was I was parented with, that I continued to parent myself with. Yeah. My dad died a year ago, and he hasn't been in my home criticizing me since I moved out when I was 18, but we continue to play these tapes forward. Mm-hmm. We're the only ones that have power over that.
Right.
It's through awareness and this consciousness of creating a new pattern, a new habit, a new way of interacting with our own self. Right. That's where the change happens. But so I can still find myself, even though I've done all this work, the work is never done until we're dead, in my opinion.
Yeah. Right. We're always growing.
We're always growing. But I think I just got off on a long tangent, but
No,
anyhow.
that was really good though.
Oh, okay.
No, I think that was really interesting, and it's you just never know what you're made of until you have to dig deep, right? And
It's so true.
There's the pot of boiling water. It's the same pot of boiling water. You put an egg in it and the inside gets hard. You put a potato in and the inside gets soft, right? It's all just...
Oh my gosh, I'd never heard of that. Did you just make that up?
No.
What?
I haven't made any.
Maybe because I don't cook that well that I don't know those little cooking analogies.
Yeah, I don't
That's
know.
lovely.
Isn't that great?
I love that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is a reflection of who we are in a situation.
Yeah.
And in that situation, some people crumple and become the doormat, and some people stand up and become the fighter.
Yeah.
Right? And I identify with the fighter.
Right.
I have a sister who chose the other path, and it's very difficult for me to be
Yeah.
around. And this is, I wonder if you have the same experience with other people who have chosen sort of I hate to say this, but it's like a victim mentality. They feel like they're at the effect of the world. They seem to live this life of victimhood. And I actually find that those people are very powerful.
Oh, but they are.
It's because it's very rooted and steeped in manipulation and powerlessness.
They can get a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And they can get a lot of sympathy.
Do you find that you are not able to relate to your own... do you have any compassion or softness for your own inner victim, so to speak?
Absolutely. I of course, I think we have to have compassion, building self-compassion, treating ourselves with that loving kindness and that understanding is hugely important. And so I think what it is for me is when I catch myself and I have this awareness, oh, I'm in victim mode. I prefer to not sit there, to stay there. Yeah. I prefer to go have the awareness and go, how is this serving me? What am I getting from this?
Right. There's always a payoff.
There's a payoff there.
For every behavior.
And then how can I move into a different level of energy? Because, being a victim in terms of an energy standpoint, it's very catabolic. It's a very destructive energy, whether you want to admit that or not. It's just the reality of how energy works.
Yeah. And we've been around people too, who sort of live in that space.
And so think about it. When you're around victim energy, do you feel energized when you're done being with them, or do you feel depleted?
No, they're Drano people.
Exactly. So it's because it's catabolic energy.
Yeah.
It's more of a destructive. Yeah. So if I catch myself being there, no, hell no, I don't want to stay there. I want to acknowledge and experience and get real, because I want to stay as authentic as I possibly can, and then move out and say, what can I learn? How can I grow? That's my mantra.
And I love that. And it feels like something that comes with maybe long-term sobriety is that when we recognize that we're exhibiting behaviors, that we don't have to beat ourselves up to get out of it.
For sure. We don't have to
totally beat myself up. Oh, you're such a loser. You're such a bad. I can't believe you did that. But now these days, it's just okay, let's just recommit. Let's just find the balance.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal. It doesn't have to be this total self-destructive
I think that's counterintuitive to beat ourselves up. It really, it's not helpful.
Yeah, I think people who are well-adjusted don't do that. And I don't know how that happens. I'm always amazed when I come across somebody who's naturally well-adjusted.
I know.
How did that happen?
You're like, who parented you, Gandhi? Or Buddha?
Gandhi.
Wait, I don't think, I'm trying to think.
Did he have kids?
I know, I was thinking about that. I was like, wait, that was the silliest thing I've ever said. Okay, sorry about
that. Did he? I feel so uneducated
I don't know.
at this moment.
I'm like, oh shoot. History blooper.
I know, that's okay. We'll just move on. We have other strengths and assets. Right.
I'm all embarrassed right now.
No, that's fine. I have other questions that I can quickly divert us from.
Okay, good.
Okay, good. Well, tell me a little bit about, you and I had talked about original harms, right?
Yeah.
So childhood stuff. So we're not pressed for time or anything, but I did want to sort of, you and I share something in common that you don't hear spoken about at mixed meetings, or a lot of times not even at podium level, but I was abused as a child by another girl, child, and who was also a child. And I don't know where she learned it. But I remember learning that had happened to you as well.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about the circumstances?
Yeah,
like when it started?
Here's what's interesting. So it was a single event for me.
A single event?
Yep, it was a single event. And it was my neighbor, and she was, I want to say she was 4 years older than me. And here's what's interesting is that after all this therapy and work that I've done, I still cannot come up with an actual age that I was. So that's how much it hurt me.
It's repressed.
Oh, yeah. So it's somewhere between 8 and 10. So we've nailed that down. So somewhere between 8 and 10. And I don't know what this deal is with not being able to come up with an age, but I've struggled to come up with an age. So I remember I was invited over to her house. She lived right across the street to spend the night. And it was like went down to the basement. That's where her room was. And then, this stuff goes down. And what happened for me is it turned on, my sexuality way before I was ready. That wouldn't have happened at that time, had this situation not happened. And then other thing that happened for me is it was this mixed message of I knew it was wrong what she was doing, but my body responded, and so it felt good. And so that created shame for me,
Right.
and so it really messed with the messages that I was telling myself about my own sexuality and safety in sexuality, safety and my relationships. And so, it wasn't a good situation. And I didn't tell my parents. So I kept it to myself I think my mom found out last year. I finally told my mom. She was in tears. Aww. She was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And here's what's interesting. You know what I ended up telling my therapist? Yeah. I said something to the effect of, well, I didn't want to ruin my mom's worldview.
Oh, you're protecting your mom.
How could an 8, 9, or 10-year-old that my role felt that it was necessary to protect her.
Right.
Like, wow. Because she was such a Pollyanna. She was and she still is a positive person. I think I'm a positive person. Holy cow. And so.
My mom's the same way.
But the thing is, where was my concern for myself? And so was it that I didn't feel safe to tell my truth? It didn't even occur to me. And I think, I look at my children and I think, God forbid if anything like that should happen to them. I think that I have a close relationship with them where they would tell me. I would hope that they would tell me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that we could protect them.
Right. Or help them heal from what
or help them heal. So that's been a long time. So, a lot of what I do in my coaching, it's certainly not to get into this deep kind of, this is trauma stuff that you would work through with a therapist. But, coaches can go pretty deep too, but this really is about over time, over your lifetime is really owning your story, and I'm all about helping women own their story. And then in a lot of cases, it's reshaping that story so that it doesn't define you in a limiting way,
Right.
So I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does. I think it's so important that we sort of own our story, but that we're able to frame it in a way that's positive and empowering, as opposed to
totally about empowerment.
Because I think a lot of people aren't aware that that's even a choice.
Yeah,
that, you know what, the story that you've been telling yourself. Let's talk about what the story is, and then let's talk about how we can redefine that story. That wasn't even a concept I was aware that was I didn't even know that was an option.
Yeah, and
so once you redefine your story in an empowering way with empowering language.
And I'm talking about, if we're talking about what you and I are sharing about, this is trauma that you definitely work through with a therapist, in my opinion.
Right.
And then once you get to that level of healing, where you've healed a trauma, you still have that as a part of your story.
Absolutely.
And then it's that integration of all that you've experienced that shapes who you are and how you want to show up in the world.
Right.
And what you want to share and how you want to contribute. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so important.
I
Such
agree.
a magical healing process. I highly encourage people to, if you get nothing else, listen, I thought this was really good, but if you have one action item out of this conversation, it would be to write down your story, and then maybe with the help of somebody else, or even on your own, how can you reframe your own story so that it's empowering? That's an option. That's something
it's totally an option.
Something that you can do, in an afternoon.
Yeah.
That could actually alter the course of the rest of your life.
Yep. Super
empowering.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this one. I want to be respectful of your time. I know you actually have an appointment today, but I know obviously you're not anonymous about your recovery. You're going to share your coaching information. Where can people reach you?
Yeah, so Michele Waterman, and it's Michele with one L, Michele, Waterman.com, and Waterman is Waterman.
Okay.
.com.
Yeah, I'll put a link on the
great.
on the website.
That's the best way to find me.
Okay, yeah. So if someone wants to reach out to you and hire you, they totally should.
Oh, I would love that. It would be an honor. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much for.
It's been an amazing experience. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, you will have to let me know how your coaching things go, and
I will.
We'll recap another time.
That sounds awesome.
Great. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to ODAT Chat. Please visit odatchat.com for more episodes, to leave feedback, or suggest topics and guests. Until next time.